Peppa Pig, the others. The evening sky was pale gray. The air was completely still. The pig family was having dinner in silence. The clinking of cutlery, the slow footsteps, the dripping of the tap. Everything sounded louder than usual. After dinner, Mummy Pig washed the dishes. Daddy Pig sat in his chair with the newspaper. George played with his dinosaur near the sofa. Peppa was putting together a puzzle on the floor. The evening felt like it was lasting slightly longer than it should. There was a knock at the door. Once, then again, no doorbell, no voices. Daddy Pig opened it. Standing on the doorstep were them, exact copies of the family, 1-to-1. Mummy, Daddy, Peppa, George, same clothes, same faces, same posture. Something was wrong. Their poses were too still, their expressions too flat. Eyes just slightly too dark, smiles frozen. They didn't speak. They simply stepped inside. No one stopped them. They spread out through the house. The second mummy stood at the sink. The second Daddy beside the chair. The second Peppa sat opposite the real one, moving a puzzle piece slowly back and forth, never placing it. The second George just stood there, glassy-eyed. At first, the real family just watched, as if it were all a mistake. But the copies didn't leave. They stayed, and acted as though they had always lived here. The next morning, it all happened again. Two families under one roof. One breakfast, mirrored movements. But the copies were off, just slightly wrong. Always half a second behind, as if mimicking learning. The second Daddy sat in the chair but never turned a page. The second Mummy washed already clean dishes. The second George held the dinosaur upside down and never blinked. The second Peppa stared directly at the real Peppa, unmoving, without emotion. Real Peppa tried to interact, but the other Peppa didn't speak. She only mirrored her like a reflection, a delayed, hollow one. By the third day, the real family began to fade, literally. Their colors dulled, their movements slowed, their voices grew quiet. The mirrors showed only the new family. On the fourth day, the real George was gone. No one looked for him. The second George remained, walking silently through the house, smiling emptily. Peppa realized no one noticed them disappearing. Real Daddy and Mummy were pale, tired, fading like old photographs. The copies now moved with more energy, more clarity. They no longer imitated. They simply existed. On the fifth day, the real Mummy vanished. Only Peppa remained. Still bright, still real. She tried to leave. The front door was there, but nothing was behind it. Only solid white light. No road, no sky, no sound. The other Peppa now slept in her bed, wore her clothes, held her toys. The dinosaur rested in the hands of the new George. One night, real Peppa woke to find the other Peppa watching her, from beneath the bed, still, unblinking. After that, there was silence. The new family lived in the house. They laughed, cooked, played. They looked normal, as if they had always been there. But in the cupboard beneath the stairs, behind old boxes and bags, if you look closely, you might see a pale pink shape, sitting quietly, knees to chest. No face, no eyes, no name. It doesn't move anymore. Peppa Pig, lost episode, the new one. One morning, Peppa woke up, and there was someone else in the room. He was sitting on the bed beside George, about their age. His skin was pale, almost gray. He didn't move or speak, but when Peppa stood up, he looked at her and smiled, as if he had been waiting. Everything else was ordinary: the bright morning light, the familiar bedroom, the smell of breakfast. Except this new child, unknown, uninvited, behaved as though he had always lived there. In the kitchen, 3 bowls were already set on the table. Mummy Pig served breakfast without a hint of confusion. Daddy Pig flipped through his newspaper. George laughed and ate his porridge. Everyone carried on as if nothing had changed. The new child ate with them. Throughout the day, Peppa watched. He helped set the table. He played with George. He sat with Daddy Pig. He drew pictures. His name was Ralphie. Everyone said it so casually, so naturally, as if he had always been part of the family. But Peppa didn't remember him. Not from yesterday, not from last week, not from ever. She checked the family photo albums. Ralphie was in all of them, standing beside George, holding hands, sitting on Daddy Pig's lap. Where Peppa used to be, now he was, as if she had been carefully cut out and replaced. On the second day, the bedroom changed. Peppa's bed was pushed into the corner. Her things began to vanish. Clothes, toys, even her books. In their place were new objects. Gray, unfamiliar, lifeless. No scent, no name, no memory. The family talked to each other, smiled, lived their lives. But none of them looked at Peppa. Sometimes their gaze passed near her, but never directly. She tried to make herself known, with movement, with noise, with presence, but was met only with silence, or worse, polite indifference. Only Ralphie looked directly at her, for long moments, without blinking. He never blinked, and his smile, always the same, whether he was eating, playing, or simply sitting still. He knew. By the third day, her name was never spoken. No one called her for meals. No one asked where she was. George laughed only with Ralphie. Mummy Pig stroked his head when he passed. Daddy Pig read bedtime stories to two children. On the fourth morning, Peppa's bed was gone. The room now had only two beds, George's and Ralphie's. Her belongings had disappeared completely. There were no traces. The only photo on the wall showed four figures: Ralphie, George, Mummy Pig, and Daddy Pig. The caption beneath it read, "Our family." The mirror reflected the empty room. Ralphie and George played on the floor. Peppa stood in the doorway, but her reflection wasn't there. The house looked the same, but inside it, another story had begun. One where Peppa had never existed. That night, she simply faded. No sound, no trace, no goodbye. The next morning, someone carefully closed her old sketchbook. On the last page was a drawing. Two children, a mother and a father. Four simple shapes. No names, no Peppa. The wrong voices. The morning started as usual. Peppa woke up, stretched, and listened to the familiar sounds of the house. The smell of breakfast drifted from the kitchen. George was already playing with his dinosaur, and birds were singing outside the window. Everything felt peaceful and normal. She went downstairs, took her seat at the table, picked up her spoon, and was just about to start eating when she heard Mummy Pig calling her name. The voice came from upstairs, from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. That was strange. Mummy Pig was standing right in front of her, making breakfast. Peppa froze, gripping her spoon tightly. She looked at her mother, but she didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Daddy Pig, calmly reading his newspaper, didn't react either. The voice called again. It was exactly like her mother's, warm, gentle, familiar. But why was it coming from somewhere it shouldn't be? Slowly, she put her spoon down, glanced at her parents one more time, and hesitantly walked toward the stairs. As she climbed up, the house felt quieter than usual. The hallway looked the same as always, but something felt off. She took another step forward, and the voice called again. This time, it was coming from behind the door of her own bedroom. Peppa swallowed hard. A chilling thought crept into her mind. If Mummy Pig was here, downstairs, then who was calling her from inside her room? She hesitated, then placed her hand on the doorknob. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. The voice had stopped, but now she could hear something else. Breathing, slow, heavy, not hers. The doorknob twitched slightly under her fingers, as if someone inside was trying to open it. Peppa yanked her hand away and stumbled backward. At that moment, Mummy Pig's voice called her again from the kitchen, asking why she was taking so long. Peppa glanced toward the stairs, her fingers trembling. When she turned back to her door, a shadow slipped out from underneath it. She didn't wait to see what it was. She turned and ran. At breakfast, no one called for her again. Mummy, Daddy, and George ate, talked, and laughed as usual. Peppa sat silently, trying to convince herself that it had all been in her imagination. But the next day, when she heard her name again, the voice was coming from inside her closet. Peppa Pig. Lost episode, The Growing Dinosaur. It all started on an ordinary morning. Peppa woke up and noticed George's plush dinosaur, Mr. Dino, standing right next to her bed. It was staring straight at her. George said maybe it had moved there on its own during the night. Peppa just snorted. He probably just played with it before bed and forgot. The next day, the dinosaur looked different. Its plastic eyes seemed shinier, almost wet. The teeth, sharper, and Peppa could have sworn it had grown a little taller. George said proudly that Mr. Dino was growing. He seemed proud. That night, Peppa woke up to a deep, dragging sound in the dark. Something heavy was moving inside their shared bedroom. She thought George was playing again, but when she turned, George was asleep, and Mr. Dino was gone from its usual spot. In the morning, the toy stood between their beds. Now it was nearly as tall as George. The stitching along its side had started to split. Something inside was shifting. From then on, George began to change. He stopped playing with Peppa. He stayed in their room, whispering to the dinosaur, feeding it real food. He said it talked to him. He said it would protect him from the ones who come at night. He wouldn't say who they were. Mummy Pig grew worried. That night, she quietly took Mr. Dino and hid it in the attic. But by dawn, the house was filled with strange noises, scratching, thudding, slow, heavy footsteps. The next morning, the attic door was torn off its hinges. Mr. Dino was back between the children's beds. But now it nearly touched the ceiling. Its eyes were no longer plastic. They moved. Peppa tried to tell her parents the toy was alive, that it was watching them, but no one believed her. George clung to the dinosaur and whispered, "He's real now. He'll never leave me." That night, Peppa woke up to a cracking noise. At first, she thought it was just the wind. Then she heard George call her name. But the voice wasn't his. It was deeper, slower. The light in their room flickered, then silence. And with a slam, the door locked itself from the inside. When the parents finally opened the door the next morning, the beds were empty. No Peppa, no George, only long claw marks on the floor. The wallpaper was torn, and the dinosaur, far too big to be a toy anymore, was gone. On the floor lay a small blanket and a child's drawing. It showed a towering green dinosaur holding the hands of two small pigs, and in the corner of the room, a faint message had been scratched into the wall. "He's not a toy anymore. Now he's with us."